You know, it's crazy right now. It's December 31st. We have our New Year's Eve plans tonight, and I'm thinking about food plots. I don't know about you, but someday all this snow and cold's going to leave, and we've had a mild time, and maybe that's why. But, you know, we're watching for does right now down on the food plot. Diane right now, she has her back to you. She's watching food plots while I'm watching the camera, so she said she's going to let me know if she sees a doe, but she's pretty competitive, so we'll see. I've seen a lot of people talking about what food plots are going to plant this coming spring, this coming summer. And I want to go through, you know, as someone who, what I do is I develop and design food plot programs for a living, times 900, pretty soon 1,000 across 26 states in the country. And so what I do is not only tell people what they should plant based on their resources, their location, their soil, the number of deer they have, and so many different variables. You can never say this is the best planting or this is the worst planting, because there's always a case for each one of these fails too. For the most part, there's always a case for even a certain food plot variety that might fail the most. It's going to work really well in a lot of lands. But bottom line is, when I'm meeting with my client in the morning, we're going over, what have you planted? Have you had a food plot? If you have, how long? How well's it done? Did it fail? What kind of failures have you had? What success? So it's a pretty cool career where I get to interview people for a couple hours at breakfast, talking about not only where do bucks bed, their neighboring concerns, their resources, their goals, their land, the land type, the habitat, but I get to talk to them for quite a lengthy time, amount of time, about how their food plots have done and what's really worked. And boy, you see a really consistent pattern across the country. So I'm going to talk about these fails, and these are what I've learned by talking to almost 1,000 people, spending an hour with them for the day, really analyzing what they've done in the past, what they need to do in the future. And you can take it for what it's worth, but I do have a lot of experience talking to landowners about their food plots, and I'd like to see you learn, and you know, not only learn from what I teach, but learn from these 1,000 people's success and failures, not to mention all the feedback I get on my videos, my books, my food plot book, and all the content that I put out online on my website. So number one, before you even start your food plots, the biggest failure I see is that folks do not address their pH concerns. So if you have low pH, you need to add lime. And most people know that, but I still see over and over again, and I hear about it online, people putting an enormous amount of fertilizer out when their soil is still 5.0 or 5.2 or 4.7 or 5.7. And the bottom line, regardless of what that soil test says for fertilizer, you need to address the pH concerns first. You need to add your lime. If you do not add the lime, you don't correct the pH, you don't raise your pH levels, then the plants and the forages that you're putting out, even if they're pH tolerant, low pH tolerant, they're still not going to be utilized with fertilizer you put in. So there are times where people are putting out 400 pounds of fertilizer and they're wasting 380 pounds of that first fertilizer. It's enormous expense. Lime is cheaper than fertilizer, especially when you look at, I was in the UP in Michigan. I put out 65 tons of lime. That's all 50-pound bags. And I'm not kidding, 50-pound bags, 65 tons. All opening that bag, 35 pounds I put through the PTO mounted broadcaster on my tractor. There's 30 to 35 tons through my PTO mounted broadcaster on the tractor. Put about 10 to 15 tons just by opening up the bag, spreading it 5 feet wide by 100 feet, and you'll spread at a rate about 2 tons per acre. When I put those recommended tons of lime out, it'd be about 4 tons per acre. I found that every 3 years I had to add another ton, so that was more of a maintenance amount. But before I could have great crops on really poor soils up there, I needed to add that lime, and that was the first step. You're better off adding lime and not adding fertilizer than the other way around every single time. So really put your focus on lime. You'll find once that soil is corrected that you really can just focus on the fertilizer for the most part, except for lower amounts of maintenance throughout the years. Always keep in mind with lime that powdered lime is better than pelletized lime. Pelletized lime is only powdered lime put into a pellet form. Think Kool-Aid. If you're putting in powdered amounts of Kool-Aid into a spinning tub or jug of Kool-Aid and water, it's going to dissolve immediately. If you have pellets, it's going to take a while for those to be stirred around and then dissolve. So really, if you can afford to get the cheaper bulk, large amounts of lime and a lot of tons, it's always the best option, as opposed to getting a lower amount of pelletized lime because you can spread it easier. I found that truly just spreading it on the ground and walking is a great way to add lime, but you have to do it before fertilizer. Now, once you have the soil corrected, it's going to be coming up spring here, and a lot of people want to rush out and plant spring food plots right away, and that means perennials. Perennials of clover, alfalfa, chicory. They do well in small areas. They do well in more southerly areas, say southern Illinois, southern Indiana, southern Ohio, Kentucky, Missouri. There's times where you can plant an acre of clover and it does really well. The problem is with clover, and even more so alfalfa, is that as soon as you get the first frost, it's not growing at all. In fact, alfalfa, the nutrition values are cut in half, and it's not palatable as much to deer. They stop hitting the big alfalfa fields for the most part unless they're really starved for food or they don't have much else available. You'll see them digging in the wintertime, for example, down to get alfalfa through snow when all the crops have been picked and there's no food plots around. So they'll hit it at that point. But once clover gets frosted out, it stops growing, and it really doesn't wake up again until spring green up. And at spring green up, deer have plenty. They really don't need your food plots during the summertime that much at all. And when you have those perennials growing during the summertime, you have the possibility of creating a dough factory. And a dough factory is a very real problem on a lot of small parcels because you make your property so attractive for bedding. It's a high stem count cover in the fall and in the winter that you add food in the summer, and now you create the conditions of a dough factory where there's perennial fawning grounds for does, and those does keep having fawns on your grounds. The number of does and fawns increases on your land, and you might think that's a good thing, but does and fawns take up space. So if you have too many does and fawns on your property, you're going to decrease the amount of potential bucks that you have on the land. Think of it as the number of does increases, you hit a certain balancing point where you have your optimum number of bucks that will be on the land. After you go past that point, the number of bucks will decrease as your number of does increase. That's a common problem I see all around the country, and it's something that will destroy your hunt, destroy your ability to have a herd. And so perennials are largely to blame for that. And when you look at the months of April, May, June, July, August, September, deer have more food than they need. They literally have 5 times more food than they need during those summer months, those spring months, once you get to spring green up. So the food plots that you're offering really aren't doing much. Now, of course, there's a case you can make. You're planting corn as long as you have a nice green base. That's an awesome summer plot because you're not attracting deer to eat that if you have your green base covered. And so green base, I'm meaning green base in the fall, such as peas, oats, rye, brassica, late planted beans. Those are all examples of great green crops that you can plant to successfully hold the deer all fall. And we've been doing it out here. We shot a doe this morning. We shot a doe last night. We're hoping Diane shoots a doe or two tonight. 2, right?
I'll be good with 1.
You'll be good with 1. She's not greedy. No, she does want another big buck though, right? You're greedy when it comes to bucks, but not does. Come on. You got to do your part to manage your herd too. But we have fun shooting does, and when we get into this late season, it's a perfect time. We can really take a good guess on how many does we have, how many are local does, and make a good harvest decision if we even need to shoot does at all during this time of the season. But we do that because we've been attracting them all season long on the food plots. That attraction starts the end of August. We're not using perennials. We're not establishing that doe herd. We're not establishing a perennial base that gets frosted out as soon as the heavy temperatures come, the cold temperatures come in October, and give us blank and useless plots going into the heart of the season, which is the time where you can influence the deer the most. Again, when we get into the summer blends in that doe factory, that is a huge fail. Now, when you talk about perennials and their failure during the hunting season and their ability to create a doe factory that can have negative effects, deep negative effects on your land, but beans are a really big summer blend, and you can add those to the alfalfa and the clover. And I really take a good hard look at, just because it's becoming spring and that spring is a few months away and you can't wait to plant, you can't wait to order your seed. Avoid the temptation to really look at the summer until you've correctly addressed the fall. So that's one of the number 1 failures, and I'm going to talk about third failures, that if you're addressing the summertime and you're neglecting the fall, then that is a major food plot failure that I see all over the country every year. You have to address the fall. So just because you have a great summer food plot program does not mean that you're going to have a great deer herd or a great hunt. And you can't have one without the other. You can't have a great deer hunt without a great deer herd, and you can't have a great herd without a great hunt. They go together. So you can never say, well, I've done a great job building the herd, but I don't really care about the hunt. It's not about the hunt. Well, if you have a great herd, you have a great hunt. The two go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And the number one of the biggest fails, and you could probably say this is one of the number one fails, is addressing summer concerns before the very critical concerns of fall. It's like having a little sliver in your pinky and your leg's about to fall off, and you're addressing your pinky with a little sliver. I mean, literally, it's that kind of an example where it's very critical in the fall, and you have to address that. Now, you hear me talk about brassicas a lot. We have a brassica blend down here. Brassicas including radish, turnip, and rape. Those are in the brassica family. Kale and canola are another part of that, and some quality blends will have that. We use Northwoods Whitetail's Sweet Feast Brassica blend, and I've used that for 8 years now. It's a really good blend, really just a workhorse blend, and it doesn't have any of as much filler of dwarf Essex rape. They don't call it dwarf for nothing. It doesn't grow very high, doesn't have a lot of volume, and so there's other rapes out there that are higher quality to add to a food plot blend. But brassica has the ability to be a big food plot failure. And I'll give you an example. The UP in Michigan where I was at, I had 8 acres of food plots, 14 different plots. I used to put half of that in Nebraska and more every single year, so I'd have about 6 out of 8 acres in Nebraska. And because there's no ag fields, there's no mass crops, there's no apples, acorns, anything up there other than bait piles in middle of November, then the deer would just hammer those brassicas. And so instead of deer feed 5 times in a 24-hour period. You want them to feed twice in their bedding areas on woody browse, even acorns a little bit, chestnuts, whatever it might be. And then you want them, and that's twice during the bedding hours. You want them to feed in the afternoon food plot slot, which is what we're hunting right now, that we try to maintain all year until we shoot them. And then they feed twice during the night. So really looking at the brassicas as being, if they're the only green thing in the area, and you live in big woods, wilderness areas, and you could be in Pennsylvania, Kentucky. It doesn't even have to do with north and south. It has to do with the fact if you don't have a lot of quality forage, you have a lot of big woods or wilderness that's not offering a lot of quality forage, then you need a lot of brassicas. And that leads us to the 5th main failure that I see, number one failure for food plots that I see as far as what you plant are soybeans. Soybeans lead to the biggest food plot failures, and everyone dreams of having that great field of giant bucks and does that suck in deer from every area in the neighborhood from miles away. And I've seen that. I've actually seen a standing bean field that was only 5 acres in an ag area suck in a lot of deer during December when it was 10, 12 degrees. It was very cold. The problem is most bean fields don't make it. And brassica fields a lot of times don't make it. And in those areas, if you need a 10-acre brassica field, you need a 30-acre bean field. The deer just annihilate them all summer long. You establish a doe residency, you establish doe fawns, so that's a big failure. It's offering food at a time that you don't need it. And then when you get into the hunting season, I've seen bean fields that aren't attractive because the leaves turn brown. Sometimes they're over attractive, and so they're eaten to the ground before October 1st. Sometimes they're hitting them, sometimes they're not. I've seen beans rot in the spring because the deer had plenty of food. They didn't need to move out of their fall areas to hit the beans. And think of the beans, when they're hitting them really hard in the fall, what I find is they hit greens because they want to. They hit corn because they need to. They hit beans because they have to. And there's a big difference. A lot of times you can have a warm up in December, they're not going to hit the beans. But they'll hit the greens consistently, and they'll hit corn. So that's why the food plot pyramid that I look at is the base of that pyramid, and what deer should eat every day is greens. That's what they'll hit in that afternoon time slot, that number 3 feeding. Then after that, if you have enough room left over, you plant corn, which I never do. We only have 2¼ acres of food plots out here on this 52-acre parcel with 30 acres of cover. And then after that, if you have room left over, you might plant some beans, but it really goes back to if you have too many does, you need to eliminate the summer food source. The first step in reducing does on your land and lowering deer numbers, if you need to, is getting rid of the summer plantings, and beans are a huge culprit for that. Clover, alfalfa, chicory. Don't ever think that you're doing a great thing for the deer herd just because you offered some food during the summer. That's at a time it's a 10 out of 10 with a local habitat. So You'd rather offer food during October, November, December, when the local habitat is going from a 3 to a 0. In late summer, it's going from a 7, 8 down to a 5, 4, because the weeds are dying. There's not much left that's green in the woods. That's a time of plenty from October, November, December through March. That's the time where you want to hit. Soybeans, do not hit that if they're down to the dirt October 1st. You didn't do anything for the deer herd, but you did spend a lot on food plot site. So I hope you remember these. Bottom line, you're really trying to take the best green blend you can, the best amount of food, and apply that to that critical fall period when deer are really looking for food. The ag fields are being plowed, they're being picked, they're being combined, and the food supply is ever shrinking when you get into September, October, November, December. If you have great food plots at that time of the year and you're not producing a whole bunch of does and fawns because you're creating a summer fawning ground during the summer, you're not putting all your eggs into perennials that are diminishing at the end of the summer going into the heart of the season, and you're addressing the pH concerns. If you address those pH concerns and you're making it so the plants can actually uptake that fertilizer and the pH is corrected with lime, then you're going to have great plots this fall. I urge you to really try to avoid these 5 food plot failures, and we're going to get back to hunting here. We're going to hopefully shoot a couple more does over these food plots. You'd think that these does wouldn't keep coming back into the food plots. We shot the one last night. We almost shot another one last night. And then I shot one this morning. And it's just, they've set a pattern of feeding on this since mid-August. I plant my food plots the end of July, early August. And they come into a good, lush, thick base of green. And so now we're shooting at them in mid-December, end of December. And they've been used to hitting these plots without being spooked for several months. And right now it's a time where we need to go in. We already Diane shot our target buck out of this blind the 7th day of gun season. Dante shot a giant 10-point out here that was a really heavy mainframe 10-point, very, very thick. Out here, I shot my muzzleloader buck out here after those 2 bucks were shot, and then we've shot 2 does out of this blind. So we're doing pretty well out here in this little area, but it's because we offer food at the right time. We've made sure that our fertility levels are correct, and we're planting what we need to, and we're not creating a doe factory. And for that, we get to shoot a very unfair amount of mature bucks in the area. And by the way, if we want to raise or lower populations, we can shoot does when we need to. We're trying to do that right now, and I hope you enjoy it.